It was supposed to be a simple evening. The air outside buzzed with the soft hum of city life, and the golden lights of the Royal Eden Hotel glimmered like jewels in the twilight. Inside the grand marble lobby, the usual blend of luxury and formality floated through the air. Polished floors, crystal chandeliers, and smiling bellhops greeted each guest like royalty. But for one woman standing at the front desk, something felt off. Evelyn Moore stood tall despite the weariness in her bones. Her silver hair was neatly pulled back, and her dark brown skin glowed with the grace of wisdom and experience. She wore a simple navy blue coat, a pearl brooch pinned near her collar, understated, elegant. At 76 years old, Evelyn moved with quiet dignity. To anyone watching, she may have seemed like someone's beloved grandmother, perhaps in town to visit family or attend a church event. But there was more to her than met the eye. Much more. Evelyn wasn't just any guest. She was the founder and CEO of the Royal Eden Hotel chain, the very hotel she now stood in. Decades ago, she had poured every ounce of her time, pain, and brilliance into building this business from the ground up. This flagship location in the heart of the city was her pride and joy. A symbol of what was possible with vision, resilience, and faith. But none of that mattered to the young woman behind the front desk. "Ma'am," the receptionist said, barely looking up, "this area is reserved for guests. If you're here to inquire about employment or directions, the service entrance is around back." Evelyn blinked, unsure if she had heard right. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," the receptionist said, her tone clipped, professional but cold. "This lobby is for registered guests only." Evelyn's heart sank, but she remained calm. "I do have a reservation. My name is Evelyn Moore." The receptionist paused, typed something on the computer, then shook her head. "There's no Evelyn Moore listed here. Maybe you made a mistake. Are you sure this is the hotel you booked?" A line had started to form behind Evelyn, impatient murmurs rising. One man in a suit leaned to the side, glaring at her like she was holding up his world. A security guard near the door began to take notice, slowly walking toward them. Evelyn opened her purse and pulled out her phone. "I can show you the confirmation." "I'm sorry, but we cannot allow people to linger in the lobby without a confirmed reservation," the receptionist said firmly, cutting her off. "If you can't prove you're a guest here, I'll have to ask you to leave." The security guard stepped closer now. "Is everything all right, Miss Carter?" he asked the receptionist, not even glancing at Evelyn. "Yes," the receptionist replied. "Just dealing with a situation." Evelyn's eyes narrowed slightly. This wasn't the first time she'd been dismissed, underestimated, or profiled. But never had it happened in her own hotel. And certainly not in the very building she had commissioned, designed, and opened with her own hands decades earlier. "I said I have a reservation," Evelyn repeated, her voice steady but firmer now. "Check again. Under Moore. Evelyn Moore." The receptionist sighed, annoyed, and glanced back at the screen. "Look, I told you, wait." She squinted at the screen, then looked up, her face starting to change. "You're Evelyn Moore?" Now the name clicked. The CEO. The founder. The woman who owned not just this hotel, but over 20 others across the country. Her photo had been in magazines, her story the focus of multiple documentaries and business school case studies. She was a living legend in the hospitality industry. A woman who had started her empire cleaning motel rooms and retired as one of the most respected CEOs in the nation. But to this receptionist, she had been just another elderly black woman who didn't look the part. Evelyn didn't say a word. She let the silence settle. The security guard stepped back, his mouth slightly open. The man in the suit behind her stopped fidgeting. The receptionist stammered, "Ms. Moore, I am so sorry, I didn't recognize you. Of course you have a reservation, it must have been a system error." "No," Evelyn said, raising a hand. "It wasn't the system." People in the lobby were now turning their heads. Whispers spread. Someone pulled out a phone, sensing something viral was unfolding. But Evelyn stayed focused, her eyes locked on the young woman behind the desk. "I built this hotel for everyone," she said quietly, "but especially for people who are too often told they don't belong. People like me. Like my parents. Like so many others who never got to walk into a place like this and feel seen." The receptionist's face turned pale. "Ms. Moore, please, I didn't mean." "But you did," Evelyn interrupted, her voice still calm. "You didn't see me because you didn't expect someone like me to be standing here. You judged before you asked. That's not how we treat people at the Royal Eden." The hotel manager, hearing the commotion, rushed out from the back office. "Ms. Moore, we weren't expecting you until tomorrow. Please, let me escort you to your suite." "I changed my plans," Evelyn said. "Clearly, I needed to." The manager nodded nervously, then turned to the receptionist. "Carter, take a break. I'll handle this." Carter stepped aside, her hands shaking. She avoided Evelyn's gaze, her mouth tight with embarrassment. Evelyn gave her a long look, not angry, just disappointed. Then she turned to the lobby, where the eyes of strangers now followed her every step. They didn't see just an old woman anymore. They saw power. They saw dignity. They saw the owner of the empire they'd just tried to cast out. As Evelyn walked slowly toward the elevator, escorted by the flustered manager, her phone buzzed. A text from her assistant. "Do you still want to do the surprise inspection this weekend?" Evelyn smiled faintly. This wasn't just going to be a surprise visit. It was about to become a reckoning. Not just for the staff, but for everyone who still believed that respect had a look, and value had a color. And what Evelyn had planned next, would leave them speechless. Evelyn stepped into the elevator, her heels clicking softly against the polished tile floor. The young manager beside her fumbled with his words, offering nervous apologies and shallow explanations, but she didn't respond. Her gaze was fixed ahead, calm but unreadable. Inside, though, she was replaying the scene in the lobby, the dismissive tone, the way they looked right through her. It wasn't new. It never really stopped, no matter how much success she had, no matter how high she climbed. As the elevator doors slid shut, a soft chime echoed in the silence. The manager tried again. "Ms. Moore, I assure you will handle this. That employee, she doesn't reflect our values." Evelyn turned slightly, meeting his eyes. "Doesn't she?" Her voice was gentle, but it landed like a stone. The manager blinked, unsure how to answer. The elevator stopped on the top floor, the royal suite. Designed with grace and elegance, it offered a panoramic view of the city skyline. It was a room fit for royalty, and Evelyn had stayed here countless times over the years. But this time, it felt different. Heavier. Tainted by what had just happened downstairs. She walked inside, setting her purse on the edge of a velvet armchair. The manager stood awkwardly at the door. "Anything else, Marcus?" she asked, not unkindly. He shook his head quickly. "No, ma'am. Please let us know if you need anything." "I will." As the door closed, Evelyn finally allowed herself to exhale. She took a moment to look out at the city below. It was beautiful. But beneath the beauty, she saw everything she'd fought against her whole life: the assumptions, the invisible walls, the polite rejections disguised as policy. And it was still happening. Even here. In her own building. She sat down and opened the small notebook she always carried. It was worn around the edges, filled with notes, reminders, reflections. On the top of the page she wrote, "They still don't see us. Even now. Even here." Her phone buzzed again, this time, a call. It was Tasha, her goddaughter and the newly appointed vice president of guest experience. A sharp young woman with bold ideas and an even bolder heart. Evelyn answered. "Auntie Ev, I just heard what happened. Are you alright?" "I'm fine, baby. Just a little tired. I can't believe someone tried to kick you out. That front desk girl." "She doesn't matter," Evelyn said softly. "She's not the first and won't be the last. What matters is how we respond." There was a pause on the line. Then Tasha said, "I figured you'd say that. What do you want to do?" Evelyn didn't answer right away. She looked around the suite, remembering the day she cut the ribbon on this very floor. The flash of cameras, the applause, the mayor shaking her hand. She remembered what it meant. What it was supposed to mean. "I want to watch," she said finally. "I want to see how they treat others. Quietly. Anonymously. No cameras. No press. Just eyes and ears." Tasha didn't hesitate. "You want an internal audit?" "I want the truth," Evelyn said. "From the lobby to housekeeping to management. I want to know what happens when they think no one is watching. And I want to hear from the guests, especially the ones who don't look like they belong on the cover of a travel magazine." "Got it," Tasha said. "I'll start tomorrow." Evelyn ended the call and sat back. The truth was, she had been meaning to do this for months. There had been whispers. Complaints. A few odd emails from longtime staff who hinted at changes they didn't like. A shift in culture. Evelyn had brushed it off at first. Trusted the systems she'd built. But tonight was different. Tonight made everything real. Meanwhile, downstairs in the hotel lounge, Carter, the receptionist, sat stiffly at a small table, her hands clenched around a glass of water. The hotel manager had told her to take a break, but she knew what that really meant. She'd messed up. And not just any kind of mess up. She had dismissed the founder of the entire company like she was nobody. Her stomach twisted with dread. She kept replaying the moment over and over in her mind. The pearls on Evelyn's coat. The quiet way she had spoken. The look in her eyes. It hadn't been anger. It had been worse, disappointment. Deep, cutting disappointment. Carter wasn't new to the job. She'd been working at the Royal Eden for 8 months. It was supposed to be a fresh start. Her last job at another hotel had ended poorly, and she had promised herself she'd do better here. She knew the standards. The training sessions had drilled them into her. Every guest deserves to feel like royalty, the mantra had said. But when it came down to it, she hadn't practiced what she preached. She thought about what her mother would say. Or worse, what her grandmother, who had cleaned hotel rooms most of her life, would say. That made her chest hurt even more. At the bar nearby, a group of business travelers laughed loudly, oblivious to her distress. One of the servers, a young man named Devin, noticed her and walked over. "You good?" he asked, lowering his voice. Carter looked up, startled. "What? You look like someone told you your car got towed and your ex is driving it." She gave a weak smile. "Close enough." Devin sat down beside her, still holding his tray. "Let me guess. Has something to do with that lady earlier?" "Yeah," Carter admitted. "You know who she was?" Devin nodded. "Oh, yeah. Everyone does. My mom still talks about that time she heard her speak at a women's conference. Says she walked out feeling like she could build her own empire." "I didn't recognize her," Carter whispered, ashamed. "I thought she was just someone lost. Maybe asking for directions." "You mean you thought she didn't belong?" Devin said, not accusing, just honest. Carter's eyes welled up. "Yeah." Devin sighed and looked down at the tray. "Happens more than people like to admit. Folks see someone who doesn't match the image in their head, and suddenly it's like the rules change. My uncle once got stopped in a hotel lobby just because he was wearing jeans. He was the keynote speaker. "I think I'm going to get fired," Carter said quietly. Devin shrugged. "Maybe. Maybe not. Depends on what you do next." Carter blinked. "What do you mean?" "People mess up," Devin said. "But not everyone owns it. Not everyone tries to fix it. You should talk to her. Not just say sorry, really talk. Ask her to tell you her story. Ask what she'd want to see done differently." Carter looked away, embarrassed. "She probably won't even want to see me." "Maybe not," Devin said, standing up again. "But you'll know you tried." Upstairs, Evelyn sat at the small writing desk, reviewing past employee surveys. Her eyes scanned the numbers, satisfaction rates, complaints, department breakdowns. But numbers weren't the full story. She needed voices. She needed truth. She would spend the next few days quietly listening. Observing. Making calls that wouldn't be traced back to her. Booking test reservations under different names. Asking tough questions. Because this hotel, her legacy, wasn't just about polished floors and grand entrances. It was about dignity. Respect. And making sure every soul who walked through those doors felt seen. What she would discover in the days ahead would shake the foundation of everything she thought she knew about her company. And it would change the Royal Eden forever. The following morning, the sun rose slowly over the skyline, casting a soft orange hue across the Royal Eden's glass facade. Inside the hotel, everything appeared normal. Bellhops wheeled luggage carts through the lobby, soft music played from hidden speakers, and guests checked in and out with polite smiles. But beneath the surface, the atmosphere had shifted. A quiet tension floated in the air, the kind you couldn't put your finger on but could feel in your chest. Evelyn had already been up for hours. She wore a simple gray sweater, slacks, and walking shoes, nothing flashy, nothing to draw attention. Just enough to blend in. She'd told housekeeping not to clean her suite and had skipped the breakfast room, opting instead for a quiet seat in the corner of the lower lobby near the elevators. From there, she could watch everything. The staff. The guests. The body language. The tone. What she saw disturbed her. A young couple, maybe in their mid-20s, stepped into the lobby, holding hands and laughing. Both were black, dressed stylishly but casually, like they were on a weekend getaway. As they approached the desk, Evelyn noticed the way the receptionist, a new face she didn't recognize, stiffened. The couple smiled and asked about early check-in, but the receptionist's tone turned clipped, her words overly formal. "I'm sorry, we don't have any availability until 3 p.m. You'll have to wait in the lounge." "No worries," the young woman said, still smiling. "Is it okay if we leave our bags with the concierge?" "Fine," the receptionist said flatly, turning away. A few minutes later, an older white couple came in, looking tired from travel. They didn't even ask about early check-in, the receptionist offered it to them before they finished speaking. Evelyn's stomach turned. Subtle. Quiet. But clear. She pulled out her phone and started a note. Early check-in policy inconsistently applied. Racial bias? Investigate further. Across the hotel, Tasha was already deep into her own review. She'd spoken to 2 longtime employees, one from housekeeping and one from the kitchen staff. Both had worked at the Royal Eden for over a decade. Both expressed similar concerns. "It's not what it used to be," the housekeeper said, her voice low. "Back in the day, we were trained to make everyone feel welcome. But now? Management only cares about VIPs and big spenders. And the rest of us? We're just background noise." In the kitchen, things were even worse. A young line cook, whose mother had worked for Evelyn during the early years, spoke with quiet frustration. "Last month, they let go of Mrs. Rosa, she's been here 25 years. Said they were streamlining operations. But they kept 2 temps who mess up every other day. And you want to know the difference? Rosa spoke up when she saw something wrong. They didn't." Meanwhile, Carter sat in the employee break room, staring at the untouched sandwich on her plate. Word had spread. Everyone knew about the incident with Ms. Moore. Some were whispering. Others were giving her looks that were harder to read. Pity? Disappointment? Annoyance? She felt like a spotlight was on her, even when no one was watching. She thought about Devon's words. Talk to her. Own it. But how do you even begin to talk to someone like Evelyn Moore? Someone who had built an empire, who had walked into her own hotel and been treated like a problem. Still, Carter couldn't ignore the gnawing in her chest. So she waited until her shift ended, changed into civilian clothes, and made her way up to the top floor. Her hand shook slightly as she knocked on the door. There was a pause. Then footsteps. Then the door opened. Evelyn stood there, eyes calm. She didn't seem surprised to see her. "Miss Moore," Carter began, her voice catching. I came to apologize. I know what I did yesterday was wrong. I didn't even think, I just assumed, and I'm sorry." Evelyn studied her for a long moment. Then she stepped aside. "Come in." The room was quiet. Carter stood near the window, unsure what to do with her hands. "I didn't recognize you," she said again, softly. "But that's not the point. The point is, I treated you like someone who didn't matter. And that's not who I want to be." Evelyn didn't speak right away. She walked to the small table by the window and sat down. "I appreciate your apology," she said. "But this isn't about me. This is about how many other people you might have treated the same way. People who didn't have the power to correct you. Did you ever stop to think about them? Carter swallowed hard. I didn't. But I will now. I promise. I don't want promises, Evelyn said, her tone sharper now. I want action. Change. If this hotel is going to carry my name, then it's going to live by my values. And if it doesn't, then maybe it doesn't deserve my name anymore. Carter's eyes widened. You'd take your name off the hotel? I built this place to lift people up, Evelyn replied. Not to watch them be pushed aside. If it's no longer serving that mission, I'll walk away. But not before trying to fix it. Carter left the suite with her head spinning. Evelyn's words stuck with her. They weren't angry. They were bigger than that. They were a challenge. Downstairs, Tasha pulled her aunt into a quiet corner later that afternoon. She had a stack of handwritten notes and recorded guest interviews. It's worse than we thought, she said. There's a real pattern. Unspoken favoritism. Racial bias. People being dismissed or ignored. And staff morale is in the basement. Evelyn nodded slowly. I felt it too. What do you want to do? Tasha asked. Evelyn looked out at the lobby again. The walls were still gleaming. The chandeliers still sparkled. But the shine was only surface deep. I want to burn down the culture, she said quietly. Not the building, the way things are run. We start fresh. New training. Leadership changes. Transparency. And we don't whisper about it. We speak loud. Tasha smiled a little. You always did like a good storm. Evelyn didn't smile back. This storm's been brewing for too long. What neither of them knew was that someone in the hotel had already caught wind of Evelyn's plans. Someone who had a lot to lose if the truth came out. And that person was prepared to do whatever it took to keep the status quo, even if it meant standing in the way of the very woman who built it all. That evening, Evelyn sat alone in her suite, surrounded by quiet. The city sparkled beyond the glass, but her mind was far from peaceful. Her notes were scattered across the coffee table, names, timelines, moments. She wasn't just collecting observations anymore. She was gathering evidence. Something real was happening inside her own hotel, and it wasn't just about one front desk mistake. There was a deeper issue woven into the daily rhythm of the Royal Eden, and she was closing in on it. Her phone buzzed again, another anonymous message. Just like the ones she'd started receiving 2 nights ago. No name. No signature. Just short, cryptic lines. Not everyone is who they seem to be. She stared at the screen, heart tightening. This was the 3rd message in as many days. The first 2 had seemed harmless, but now it felt targeted. Personal. Almost like someone was warning her, or threatening her. Downstairs, Tasha sat in the staff conference room, preparing a report that would be delivered to the executive board. Her findings weren't just troubling, they were damning. Patterns of bias in guest treatment. Unjustified firings of longtime staff. Disparities in how disciplinary actions were handled, often tied to race or position. She stared at the data, her fingers frozen over the keyboard. This wasn't just poor management. This was negligence. Willful ignorance. And the worst part? It all pointed back to someone high up. Someone with power. Someone who had been covering the cracks with fresh paint and smiles for years. Tasha had cross-checked the reports multiple times. One name kept surfacing: Martin Gray, the regional operations director. He'd joined the company 3 years ago, recommended by a major investor. On paper, he was efficient, polished, and loyal. But behind closed doors, the story was different. Staff feared him. Long-time employees had either resigned or been quietly replaced under his tenure. Training budgets were slashed. Complaint logs were edited. And yet, the board kept approving his recommendations. Because profits were up. Now, the puzzle pieces were falling into place. Upstairs, Evelyn's phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a message. It was a call from reception. "Ms. Moore," the voice said, "Mr. Gray would like to meet with you in the executive lounge. He says it's urgent." Evelyn hesitated. Then, calmly, she replied, "Tell him I'll be there in 15 minutes. She changed into a charcoal blazer, kept her expression unreadable, and made her way down the hallway, heels silent against the carpet. Every step felt heavier than the last. Something in her gut warned her. This meeting wouldn't be simple. The executive lounge was dimly lit, with sleek leather chairs and glass walls overlooking the city. Martin Gray stood by the bar, pouring himself a glass of bourbon. He turned when she entered, flashing the same rehearsed smile he used in every board meeting. "Evelyn," he said smoothly. "Good to see you." She didn't return the smile. "You asked to speak." He motioned to a chair. "Please, sit." She remained standing. Gray took a sip, then leaned against the counter. "Word's gotten around that you've been doing some snooping. Is that what you call it?" He gave a short chuckle. "Look, I get it. This place is your baby. You built it. But you've been away. Things change. Businesses evolve. And if you dig too deep, you might not like what you find." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "You're right. I don't like it." His smile faltered, just slightly. "Careful, Evelyn. If you blow this up, you'll hurt the brand. You'll shake investor confidence. You'll cost people jobs. Including your nieces. I know she's been helping you." Evelyn took a slow breath. "So this is a threat now?" "I'm saying," Gray said, voice lowering, "there's a smart way to handle this. Let it go. We fix things quietly. No noise. You go back to being the face of the brand, and we keep the money flowing. Everyone wins." Silence stretched between them. Evelyn stared at him, cold and steady. Then she turned and walked away. The next morning, the hotel buzzed with something unspoken. Rumors. Whispers. Staff noticed Evelyn moving with quiet purpose, speaking to legal, to HR, even security. Something was coming. And whatever it was big. But Gray wasn't sitting idle. He'd begun working his own angles, calling board members, framing Evelyn's behavior as erratic and emotional. He knew the board respected her, but they feared disruption more. If he could convince them that she was trying to tear down the very company she built, he could get ahead of her. Maybe even push her out. By noon, an emergency board meeting was called. Tasha got the notification while she was finalizing her report. Her hands trembled as she grabbed her bag and rushed to the executive floor. She knew this wasn't just a meeting. It was a line being drawn in the sand. Meanwhile, in the lobby, Carter stood behind the desk, watching as hotel security subtly repositioned themselves near the elevators. She hadn't seen Evelyn since their conversation, but she could feel the ripple effects. Staff were whispering about audits, about surveillance footage being pulled, about people suddenly called into HR. Some were scared. Others looked relieved. And then it happened. The fire alarm went off. Panic rippled through the lobby. Guests looked around in confusion. Staff scrambled into action, following protocol. But something about it felt off. Too sudden. Too convenient. Tasha's phone buzzed, another message, this time from the IT manager. Server breach. Someone's trying to wipe internal records. Her heart sank. At the same time, Evelyn received a call from her assistant upstairs. "Ms. Moore, your suite. Someone's been inside." The lock logs show access during the fire alarm. Evelyn didn't waste time. She turned and made her way up the stairs. Elevators were halted during the alarm. Her legs burned with each step, but her mind raced faster. Someone was trying to cover their tracks. And if they'd gone after her room, they might be looking for the notes, the reports, maybe even her devices. By the time she reached her floor, hotel security had already sealed off the hallway. One officer handed her a phone. It was gray, the guard said. He used a MasterCard. Left 5 minutes ago. We're reviewing the footage now. Evelyn took the phone, pressing it tightly to her ear. Track him. Don't let him leave this building. The guard nodded and turned to follow orders. Downstairs, the fire alarm was finally shut off. Guests returned to their rooms. But the tension didn't ease. Something had shifted permanently. There was no going back now. Tasha arrived at the boardroom just as Evelyn entered from the opposite side. Her clothes were slightly damp with sweat, her eyes burning with fire. Gray was already there, seated at the head of the table. Calm. Composed. Pretending like nothing was wrong. But he knew. They all did. And as the doors shut behind them, the board turned to face Evelyn, waiting. She took her seat slowly, placed her hands on the table, and met every pair of eyes around her. No one spoke. The silence was thunderous. Then Evelyn leaned forward, voice steady and quiet. There are things you all need to know. And after today, none of us will be able to pretend anymore. The room held its breath. The real storm was about to begin. Evelyn let the silence stretch for a moment longer, her eyes slowly scanning the faces at the table. Some looked anxious. Others unreadable. And a few, especially the newer board members, seemed downright uncomfortable. Good. That meant the truth was close enough to reach them. I have proof, she began, her voice low and firm. Proof of deliberate misconduct happening within these walls. Misconduct that violates not only company policy, but basic human decency. I've spent the past 4 days speaking to staff, reviewing internal documents, analyzing security footage, and compiling a report with the help of a third-party consultant. Martin Gray shifted slightly in his chair but kept his arms folded. He was playing calm, but Evelyn could see the twitch in his jaw. Since Mr. Gray took over operations, she continued, there's been a systematic erosion of the hotel's founding values. Favoritism, racial bias, internal intimidation, and the quiet silencing of long-standing employees who dared to speak up. This isn't just a leadership issue, it's a cultural one. and I won't allow my name to be tied to it." One of the older board members, Ms. Rodriguez, cleared her throat. "Evelyn, these are serious accusations. Do you have anything concrete?" Evelyn nodded. She reached into her folder and laid out 3 copies of the executive summary on the table. "What I have here is only a portion. The full report is being sent to your emails. It includes testimonies, policy discrepancies, security logs, even time-stamped access records showing unauthorized activity during last night's fire alarm." That last detail made several heads turn sharply toward Gray. He kept his cool, but his eyes flicked toward Evelyn. "Are we really doing this?" he said smoothly. "Over a few isolated incidents? Every hotel has issues. That doesn't mean there's some kind of conspiracy." Evelyn didn't even blink. "I'd believe that, Martin. If someone hadn't tried to erase the digital complaint files this morning while everyone was evacuated." The room fell still. Tasha stepped forward from the side wall, her voice steady. "Our IT manager confirmed an unauthorized breach attempt at 9:14 a.m. Server access came from Martin's administrative credentials. The audit logs have already been secured and backed up off-site." Gray's face finally faltered. He opened his mouth, searching for a rebuttal, but before he could speak, Evelyn dropped the real bombshell. "And that's not all," she said. "I also received a letter this morning from an anonymous staff member. At first, I thought it was just another whistleblower note. But it contained something else, copies of internal memos showing that Martin has been diverting portions of the staff training and development budget into a private consulting firm. A firm registered under his brother-in-law's name." Gasps and murmurs rippled across the room. That was the second plot twist. The mismanagement, the discrimination, the toxic work environment, it was all bad enough. But now they were staring at potential embezzlement. Martin stood, no longer composed. "That's a lie." Evelyn raised a brow. "Would you like to deny it in writing?" "Because I've already forwarded the documents to legal counsel." Another board member, Mr. Lee, leaned forward, brows furrowed. "Why wasn't this brought to our attention earlier?" "Because someone's been carefully cleaning their tracks," Tasha answered. "But they got careless. And now, it's all unraveling." The tension inside that boardroom was suffocating. Then, just when the room couldn't feel any heavier, Evelyn's assistant entered with a tablet, whispering something into her ear. Evelyn's eyes narrowed as she took the device and quickly scanned the screen. She turned it to face the board. "This just came in from a former employee who left the hotel under suspicious circumstances last year," she said. "They've been silent, until now. They were paid a large sum to sign a non-disclosure agreement after filing a complaint about racially motivated misconduct by a senior executive." She tapped the screen again. And that executive was not Martin Gray. A second wave of shock moved through the room. Now everything twisted again. Another player was involved. Someone else with power, influence, and a deeper secret. Evelyn looked around the table, her voice cool but intense. "We've been looking at Martin because he's been the most obvious problem. But this new evidence points to someone else behind the scenes. Someone feeding off his chaos while keeping their own name clean." She paused. "I want a full audit of all upper-level executive conduct over the past 5 years. I want a review of NDAs. And I want those who signed them to be given the opportunity to speak without retaliation." The board members looked rattled. Because now it wasn't just about Martin Gray, it was about the system they had all allowed to grow, unchecked, under their watch. And one of them, possibly seated at that very table, had something to hide. Gray looked as if he wanted to say something, but Evelyn turned to him one last time. "I gave you the chance to clean this up quietly. You chose to dig deeper into dishonesty. And now it's no longer your decision." Outside the boardroom, Carter was pacing the lobby nervously, unsure of what would happen next. Staff had started whispering again, but this time, their eyes were hopeful. Something was happening behind those closed doors, and they could feel the shift. Back upstairs, the board was silent again. But this silence was different than before. It wasn't confusion. It was fear. Fear of exposure. Of accountability. And in that silence, Evelyn made her final demand. "I'm calling for an emergency vote of no confidence in Martin Gray's position effective immediately, pending investigation. And I want an external firm brought in to conduct a third-party ethics review of every department in this hotel." No one dared object. Not yet. But as the board prepared to cast their votes, one of the members, Ms. Diane Carlton, who had sat quiet and composed all this time, slowly closed her laptop and leaned back. She looked directly at Evelyn. "I agree with everything you've said," she began. "But if you want a clean house, you'll need to be ready to lose more than just one man. This hotel, this company, it's built on more than policies and mission statements. It's built on power. And when you start shaking power, it fights back." Evelyn stared at her. Was Diane warning her? Or was she admitting to something? The room sat in stunned silence as Diane stood up, picked up her purse, and walked out without another word. And just like that, Evelyn realized, the real fight hadn't even begun yet. The boardroom was heavy with silence after Diane Carlton's exit. Her words echoed in Evelyn's mind long after the door had clicked shut. It's built on power. And when you start shaking power, it fights back. There was no mistaking it, Diane had known more than she let on. Maybe even everything. But what Evelyn didn't understand yet was whether Diane had been protecting the system, or herself. One by one, the board members began casting their votes. Some nodded solemnly as they tapped their screens. Others hesitated, clearly wrestling with the consequences. But the tide had turned. The evidence was too damning. The silence from Gray too loud. And Evelyn's authority, though shaken, was far from broken. The final vote was unanimous. Martin Gray was removed from his position pending a full investigation. He didn't speak. He didn't argue. He stood slowly, collected his blazer, and left the room without a word. But not before casting one long, cold glance at Evelyn. A look that said, "This isn't over." Evelyn exhaled, only slightly. It was a victory, but not a clean one. The room had voted, yes, but they were still afraid. Of what had been uncovered. And of what still remained hidden. And Diane's final warning clung to the air like smoke. Back in her suite that evening, Evelyn sat alone once more, sipping tea and staring out into the lights of the city. The hotel buzzed below like a hive beginning to wake up again. She had issued statements to staff, promising reform, investigations, transparency. The responses were mixed, but hopeful. Some employees, like Carter and Tasha, had already seen the shift. Others were watching to see if the promises would turn to real action. Then, just past midnight, there was a knock at her door. She opened it to find the night concierge, holding a small envelope. "This was delivered downstairs a few minutes ago," "Ms. Moore," he said. "No name. Just your initials." She nodded, took it, and closed the door behind her. Inside the envelope was a single printed photograph. It was a black and white image, grainy but clear. It showed a much younger Evelyn, maybe in her late 30s, standing beside a sharply dressed man in front of the Royal Eden during its grand opening. She remembered the moment clearly. That man had been her business partner, friend, and once, almost something more. He had vanished from the company 25 years ago after a bitter dispute. Left without explanation. And as far as she knew, had never been heard from again. On the back of the photograph was a handwritten note. "Not everyone walks away. Some are pushed." Her heart stopped. For decades, she had believed he'd left because they had clashed over the direction of the company. Over her insistence on keeping the hotel inclusive, community-centered, and purpose-driven. He had wanted expansion, luxury, and elite clientele only. They had fought. Words were said. But this? What did this mean? She stared at the handwriting. It was unfamiliar. But the message was clear. There was another layer to the story. One buried in the past. One that might explain why the cracks in the hotel's foundation had grown so deep. And maybe, just maybe, someone had been trying to keep her from uncovering it all along. The next morning, Evelyn walked through the lobby slowly, the photograph tucked inside her coat pocket. She stopped when she saw Carter wiping down the reception desk, her face calm, eyes focused. "Morning, Carter," Evelyn said. Carter looked up, startled but smiling. "Ms. Moore. You okay?" Evelyn nodded. "Better than yesterday. Worse than tomorrow." Carter chuckled. "Sounds about right." She started to walk away, then paused. "By the way," Carter said carefully, "that woman. Diane Carlton. She stopped by the desk last night." Evelyn turned. "Really?" Carter nodded. "She left this for you." From under the desk, Carter pulled a small flash drive in a plain black case. Said it was, just in case things went too far. She seemed strange. Like she didn't want to give it, but had to. Evelyn took the drive, her mind racing. Back in her suite, she plugged it into her laptop. A single folder appeared. Inside were dozens of documents, emails, meeting transcripts, files stretching back decades. And in the middle of it all, she found it. The original board vote from 25 years ago, the one that forced her former partner out. It had been doctored. He hadn't walked away. He'd been betrayed. Not by her. But by Diane Carlton. She had orchestrated the vote, manipulated members, and buried the records. Why? Because she had a deal in place with outside investors, those who promised expansion, luxury, and exclusivity, in exchange for control. The original vision of the Royal Eden had been sold off bit by bit, hidden beneath layers of corporate language. And Evelyn had never known. Her stomach churned. It wasn't just about what was happening now. The corruption hadn't begun with Martin Gray. He was just a symptom. The roots went deeper. And Diane, poised, respected, untouchable, had built her legacy on a lie. But then Evelyn saw something else. An unsigned draft letter. From Diane. Addressed to Evelyn. "I did what I thought I had to. But I never stopped regretting it. He was right. You were right. And now, you'll have to finish what we couldn't. Clean it up before it swallows everything." Evelyn closed the laptop slowly, her reflection staring back at her in the black screen. The final twist wasn't revenge. It was legacy. She had built this hotel with heart, purpose, and principle. And though it had been twisted and bruised along the way, it wasn't beyond saving. But now she knew, it wasn't just the present she had to fix. It was the past she had to heal. And with that, she stood up, straightened her jacket, and made her way down to the lobby once more. Because the real work was just beginning. Over the next few weeks, the Royal Eden Hotel became something it hadn't been in years, a place where people started telling the truth. Evelyn launched a full, independent investigation into past and present misconduct. The firm she hired had no connection to the board, no ties to management, and most importantly, no fear of uncovering what had long been buried. Staff members who had once been silenced were invited to speak freely and confidentially. Some cried. Some vented. Some simply handed in letters they'd written years ago but never had the courage to send. But all of them, in one way or another, helped Evelyn rebuild the soul of the hotel. Martin Gray was gone. The company filed formal charges against him once the financial misconduct was confirmed, and he never stepped foot inside the hotel again. But Evelyn knew it wasn't just about removing one person. The culture had to shift. She also didn't hide the truth. In a powerful company-wide meeting held in the Grand Ballroom, she stood in front of hundreds of employees, housekeepers, chefs, concierges, porters, office staff, and told them everything. She shared the failures, the mistakes, the betrayal she hadn't seen coming, and the promises she now intended to keep. There was a long pause when she finished, a quiet moment where no one moved. Then a single clap started in the back of the room. Then another. And within seconds, the entire room erupted in applause. It wasn't loud or wild, it was steady. Meaningful. A sound of relief. Of belief returning, little by little. The hotel also reopened its community programs. Evelyn reinstated the scholarship fund that had once helped local youth study hospitality management. The diversity and inclusion training, once stripped down to a quarterly formality, became an ongoing, living effort guided by employees themselves. A staff-led ethics committee was formed, giving every department a voice in hotel operations. Carter, the receptionist who had first stood up for Evelyn, received a full scholarship to study hotel management. Tasha, Evelyn's right hand through the storm, was promoted to director of operations. She cried in the elevator when Evelyn told her. Then they laughed together in the hallway, the kind of laugh that only happens when two people finally see daylight after walking through fire. And then there was the past. Evelyn had the documents Diane Carlton left reviewed by a legal team and archived for transparency. The truth about her former partner's forced departure became public within the company. Though it shocked many, it also gave context. People saw how the erosion of integrity hadn't begun overnight. It had started long ago, and simply festered until it became something too heavy for the walls to hold. Diane never returned to the board. She sent Evelyn one final letter, short, typed, and signed. Some things break so quietly, we don't hear them until years later. Thank you for listening to the sound. D. Evelyn didn't respond. There was nothing more to say. But she kept the letter. Months passed. And slowly, the hotel's reputation began to rise again, not from a flashy campaign, but from word of mouth. Guests started noticing the difference. The staff was warmer, more present. There was a new energy, an authenticity that couldn't be bought. One afternoon, a middle-aged couple checked in and asked to meet the owner. Evelyn, who rarely mingled with guests anymore, agreed out of curiosity. When she met them in the lobby, the woman reached out and took her hand. "My mother used to work here when you first opened," she said, eyes misty. "She always said this place had soul. I came to see if it still did. And I think it does." Evelyn smiled, and for the first time in a long while, it felt full. Real. Later that evening, she walked alone through the garden courtyard. The lights shimmered over the fountain she had installed in the early days, now restored to its original beauty. As she sat on the edge of the stone bench, she thought about everything: the nights she'd doubted herself, the betrayal, the photograph with the cryptic message, and the woman she used to be before the weight of legacy clouded her vision. But in that quiet moment, Evelyn felt something else too. Pride. Not the kind that comes from applause or headlines, but the kind that comes from staying true, even when it hurts. From standing up not just for a hotel, but for the people inside it. From remembering why she started this in the first place. She pulled the old photograph from her coat pocket again. Her and her former partner, smiling at the ribbon cutting. A simpler time. Maybe a more innocent one. Then she looked toward the glowing windows of the hotel, alive with people and possibility again. It was no longer the same place. And neither was she. The Royal Eden had survived storms before. Economic shifts. Market crashes. Even pandemics. But this had been different. This had been about the heart. And now, finally, it was beating again. As she stood to return inside, Evelyn paused and whispered softly to herself, still standing. It wasn't just a statement. It was a promise. And that was how the story ended, not with a press conference or a final speech, but with a woman walking back into the hotel she built, knowing that its future, like hers, had been reclaimed. The lesson wasn't just about leadership or reputation. It was about resilience. And the quiet power of doing what's right, no matter how long it takes. Because in the end, the soul of a place is shaped not by luxury or marble floors, but by the people who refuse to let it fall.